Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a massive political crisis that took place in the year 680 CE. Seriously, the events of this single year sent absolute shockwaves through the Islamic Empire. It created divisions and set these huge leadership precedents that honestly still echo into the modern era. We're talking about the deeply fascinating, highly complex road to Karbala.
So the big question is, how exactly did one ruler's final decision trigger the tragedy of Karbala? Well, to truly grasp the stakes here, we can't just start on the battlefield. No, we have to rewind. We need to unpack the intensely charged political climate of the time, the super controversial appointment of a new leader named Yazid, and the fierce opposition that ultimately set Imam Hussein's historic journey in motion.
Setting the stage with Section 1 of Fragile Empire Unites, focusing on the Muslim world post-Civil War.
To understand the sheer stakes of this crisis, you really have to consider the massive scale of the Muslim world at this point in time. It's nearly 50 years after the passing of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the state had just exploded across Arabia, the Levant, Iraq, Egypt, and Persia. But, this rapid expansion didn't exactly happen in a vacuum of peace. The first fitna, which was a brutal civil war, left deep, lasting wounds. Eventually, Muawiyah emerged from all this volatility, established the Umayyad Caliphate, and somehow managed to maintain a fragile yet real stability.
Which brings us to Section 2, the succession controversy, and a major paradigm shift in leadership. As Muawiyah approached his final years, a massive, looming question threatened that fragile peace we just talked about. Who is going to succeed him? This triggered a fundamental, philosophical clash between two competing political models. Traditionally, caliphs were selected through consultation, meaning a broad agreement among respected community leaders. But Muawiyah? He proposed hereditary succession, moving leadership directly to his son. Supporters argued this shift was absolutely necessary to prevent another catastrophic civil war, while critics viewed it as an unacceptable departure from early Islamic traditions. The candidate right at the center of this huge paradigm shift was Yazid ibn Muawiyah. Born into the highly influential Quraysh tribe, Yazid wasn't without credentials, He actually had real administrative and military experience. His supporters looked at him and saw a man capable of governing a really complex, vast empire. But his critics were asking a more fundamental question. Was he really the most suitable candidate to lead, especially without going through that essential process of traditional consultation? Moving to Section 3, Voices of Opposition, and the hesitation in Medina.
Now, Muawiyah didn't just wait until his death to sort this all out. He proactively instructed his governors to secure pledges of allegiance for Yazid early on. But in Medina, which was a deeply important spiritual and political hub, the pushback was immediate. Prominent figures like Hussein ibn Ali, Abdullah ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn al-Zubair, and Abdullah ibn Abbas expressed serious reservations. And remember, their strong ties to the earliest generation of Islam meant their hesitation carried immense political weight across the entire empire.
So, the crucial point here is that when we talk about political and spiritual influence, Hussein ibn Ali was literally in a category of his own. As the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and someone widely revered for his deep knowledge and flawless character, his stance wasn't just another opinion. His concern over the community's leadership meant that his decision would instantly become the absolute focal point of this unfolding crisis.
There was another major resistor who simply refused to immediately support Yazid, and that was Abdullah ibn al-Zubair. Known for his incredibly keen intelligence and sheer determination, he became a massive political challenger. Definitely keep his name in your back pocket, because his defiance would actually go on to deeply shape political events long after Karbala.
Medina was essentially a political powder keg at this point. On one side, you had the pro-nomination camp, totally convinced that without Yazid stepping in, the empire would just fracture into chaos. On the flip side, the anti-nomination camp was absolutely terrified that accepting this move would permanently establish hereditary succession and completely destroy consultative governance. It was a fierce, intense debate over pure legitimacy.
Now we hit Section 4, the transition of power, where the crisis officially escalates.
680 CE. Really let that year sink in for a second. This marks the death of Muawiyah. His nearly 2-decade rule had finally come to an end. That era of relative stability we talked about, officially over. And this highly contested transition of power was immediately put to the ultimate test. The chain reaction was instant. Step 1, Muawiyah dies. 2, Yazid immediately assumes authority.
3. Knowing his power isn't fully secure, Yazid instantly orders his governors to demand formal allegiance. And 4. Suddenly, the governor of Medina is approaching Hussein. It's literally a ticking clock scenario. Yazid is moving incredibly aggressively, and the pressure has arrived right at Hussein's front door.
Hussein was faced with an absolutely impossible dilemma. If he accepts allegiance, he formally recognizes Yazid's authority, effectively endorsing hereditary succession and violating his deepest convictions. But if he refuses, he triggers a major political crisis with a ruler who commands the vast resources of the entire empire. What started as a theoretical political disagreement had, in a flash, transformed into a defining historical moment. Which brings us to our final act, Section 5, the path to Mecca, a truly defining moment.
The atmosphere in Medina was incredibly tense and uncertain. Hussein didn't just immediately comply with the governor's request. Knowing that whatever he decided would have massive, far-reaching consequences, he made a really critical tactical choice. Under the cover of this mounting tension, he left Medina. Traveling with his family to Mecca placed vital physical distance between himself and that immediate political pressure. It basically bought him crucial time to plan, just as events began spiraling totally out of control.
But, as you can imagine, the world wasn't just waiting around for him. News of Hussein's refusal and his journey to Mecca spread like wildfire across the empire. Over in Iraq, specifically in the city of Kufa, people began actively mobilizing. They were openly discussing Hussein as a potential alternative leader. Soon enough, actual letters and promises of support from Kufa started flooding into Hussein in Mecca. The gears of history were already turning. And that brings us to the ultimate question. With letters literally pouring in from Kufa and an envoy named Muslim ibn Aqil beginning his mission to go assess the situation on the ground, what will Hussein decide to do next? Will he stay in the safety of Mecca or answer the call of Kufa and risk everything? The choices made in the coming months will permanently alter the course of the Muslim world. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep exploring this incredibly dramatic chapter of history. Catch you next time.